This is Yvette Williams. You may recognise her. She was an Olympic champion at the age of 23, winning gold at Helsinki in 1952. This is Angela Walker. 40 years after Yvette's Olympic achievement, Angela won a gold and 3 bronze medals at the 1990 Commonwealth Games in Auckland. She also competed at the 1988 Olympics in Seoul. Aside from both achieving incredible international sporting success, they are also connected by this book, Ideals Are Like Stars, which Angela, now an author, wrote about Yvette's trailblazing career. On the 31st of May 2022, we were fortunate to interview Angela about her journey as an author and sportsperson. Hopefully, it inspires you to look to the stars and dream big.
Yvette's story is incredibly inspiring, especially to young women in New Zealand. At the end of your author's note in Ideals Are Like Stars, you mention a phrase in one of Yvette's scrapbooks that reads, "Faith, courage, determination are the factors that govern most quests." I wanted to know the ways in which you have found empowerment while facing the barriers of misogyny as a woman who has made a name for herself in sports.
That's a really great question, Ocean. Thank you. And I think it's a particularly great question because in some ways you've also cleverly answered it by tagging that quote of Yvette's in there, talking about faith, courage, and determination. Because I think those are probably exactly the things that are required as a woman, as a sportswoman, if you do come up against misogyny or challenges where there isn't gender equality. So yeah, I think it's exactly those things that you've articulated. And I think, for me, if I have ever come up across those things, I've always reminded myself that they're just rooted in ignorance, and that, that whatever it is that you're facing is just plain wrong. And so you do have to draw on your own faith, whether that's, even just belief in yourself and your own courage, and be determined to sort of move forward. So thank you for that question. It's very insightful.
To what extent did you feel a connection with Yvette Williams while writing her story, as a former Olympics and Commonwealth Games competitor yourself?
Yeah, there was so much that I found when I was writing Dame Yvette Williams' story that I could relate to, and experiences that we'd shared, even though we'd been sportswomen 40 years apart. For example, when she marched in the opening ceremony at the 1952 Helsinki Olympics, and I wrote that scene in the book, it wasn't too much of a stretch of imagination for me to think about, well, what is that experience like? How does it feel to be walking into an Olympic opening ceremony, having done that myself? And even just little things like, when she talked in her diaries about the fact that, she didn't know whether to go to bed early and get a good night's sleep for training the next day, or whether to go out with her friends. Those are sort of some of the dilemmas as a young athlete when you're training really hard that you're confronted with. So time and time again, I did find that I could understand and relate to the different experiences that she was having. Another good example is she hated having to give a speech. She was called upon a few times to speak at various events, and she found that terrifying, more terrifying than long jumping in a big Olympic stadium. And I could absolutely relate to that. It is scary to have to stand up and give a speech. So both in just day-to-day life as an athlete, and also just with just how hard you train and how much you want to try to make an Olympic team. There was just so many things that, having been an athlete myself, while I wrote her story, I really, really could identify with. So it was helpful, really helpful as the author to have had some similar experiences.
How did you find all of the archives? On the back of your book, it describes some of the information in it as never seen before.
So this project came about because Yvette read the first book that I'd written and apparently really enjoyed it. And her daughter suggested to her that perhaps I might be the ideal person to tell her story. So basically, and I was thrilled to be asked and agreed in a heartbeat. And so basically, I then met with Yvette's daughter, and this all happened after she died, not long after she died. And they very kindly shared with me all the archival material that had been collected throughout Yvette's life. Fortunately for me and all of us, actually, Dame Yvette was a meticulous record keeper, and she'd actually kept these incredible scrapbooks, like these really thick, too thick scrapbooks that were packed full of all the newspaper cuttings from the era. And she'd also kept daily diaries, which she'd started when she was about the same age as you at Otago Girls High School. And curiously enough, in a little lockdown that they'd had because there was a polio epidemic when she was in her second year of high school at Otago Girls High School, and she'd had to spend a few months at home and not been able to go to school. So she was very much your age, and she started a diary, and then she continued that habit right through her athletics career. And I believe quite religiously through her life as well, she wrote a daily diary. So all of those things I was privileged to be able to borrow while I researched the book. And it just meant that I could really write it in the style of a novel, because there was all of this day-to-day detail that you wouldn't normally have. So yeah, really fortunate to have been able to access all of that information.
What inspired you to become an author after your gymnast career, and are you happier now or have any regrets?
Well, I first decided to try and write a book I guess it was about a decade ago now. And it was because after my father had died, I came across his Second World War diaries, which I hadn't even known had existed. And I started to read them. And I realized that there was this incredible story. And I thought, hey, I'm going to try and turn this into a book, which was possibly a little bit naive at the time. I thought it would be hard, but I don't think I quite realized just how hard it would be to write a book. And seeing you guys sitting there in the library reminds me that while I was on that sort of steep learning curve of trying to figure out how to write my first book, I'd often take myself off to my local library and just look at all the books and go, okay, so if all these people have done it, it's possible. And I used that volume of books as my inspiration to sort of keep going and have that belief that I could write a book. So that was really how it all started. And then the opportunity to write a second book presented through Dame Yvette's family. The question about, am I happier now as an author rather than as a gymnast? I loved both careers. I got to be a gymnast, earlier in my life. I retired from gymnastics when I was 22, and I'd done that for about 13 years, and I loved it, really loved being a gymnast. In fact, in a country like New Zealand, there's not really any reason to do gymnastics unless it's your choice and you love it. But now I love being a writer, and I'd say it's probably a tie. Thanks for the question.
So obviously the sport that you did and the sport that Yvette did are quite different. So did you find a lot about Yvette's story relatable to you, and what kind of stuck out to you the most about her story?
Yeah, I really did relate to lots of things. And so I suppose what stuck out to me was when things were different and what I didn't relate to, or that I hadn't personally experienced. And I guess there are a couple of things there. I mean, one was just how different an era it was to be a woman. And so for Yvette, when she was, around 21, all her friends started getting married and starting to have the first of usually around 4 children, which was typical in the 1950s. And so she was under quite a lot of pressure. People would say to her, when are you getting married? And what about children? And running around and doing sports was kind of seen as a slightly unorthodox choice. So I really kind of found it interesting to reflect on just how far we've come for sportswomen. And she really, blazed a trail in that regard by showing what was possible and inspiring. Now when we see people like Dame Lisa Carrington becoming our most successful Olympian ever, it's a whole different world versus the world that Dame Yvette had to contend with as she strove to become an Olympic champion. And I think the other thing that really stuck out for me was just how Yvette was quite unflappable, no matter what situation she found herself in. She wasn't a worrier. She didn't let things bother her. She just took things in her stride, which is, easier said than done. But somehow she just seemed to be able to be in a high pressure situation and just go, right, well, I'll just get on with it then. And so that really stuck out to me, just what an amazing competitive temperament she had and what she could do under pressure.